Welcome back to Ancient Echoes, where myth, memory, and ritual leave their imprint not just on temples or tablets, but on every stone ball court and carved altar buried beneath the jungle floor. I'm Chelsea, and in this episode we are stepping into something older, more humid, and far less understood. The world of the Olmecs, Mesoamerica's first great civilization. This week we're exploring two cornerstones of Olmec culture, religion and sport, which in their world were often one and the same. Because for the Olmecs, gods weren't distant abstractions. They were present, alive in animals, mountains, rivers, storms, and in the very layout of their sacred spaces. And sports? Not a hobby, not leisure, but a ritual, a cosmic reenactment with serious stakes, sometimes including blood, death, and the belief that the outcome might literally keep the universe running. This episode is about how the Olmec created meaning through myth, how their sacred landscapes shaped their belief systems, and how one particular game, the Ballgame, became both a public spectacle and a religious ritual echoed by Maya and Aztec centuries later. So grab your obsidian mirror, lace up your symbolic rubber sandals, and let's step into the world where gods wore jaguar faces and the ball court doubled as a cosmic arena. When it comes to the Olmec gods, we're working with more stone than scripture. There's no sacred text, no written mythology. What we have are symbols, deeply carved, often stylized, and scattered across monuments, altars, and figurines. And that leaves us with one of the most enduring and mildly frustrating questions in Mesoamerican archaeology. Who or what did the Olmecs worship? Enter the deity debate. The jaguar, the serpent, or possibly both wearing matching cosmic accessories? Let's look at the jaguar first. The were-jaguar, half human, half jaguar, with a downturned mouth and almond-shaped eyes, is the Olmec's most iconic and baffling motif. It appears on sculptures, jade figurines, cave walls, and even baby-faced altars. Some scholars believe it represents a rain god whose growl signaled coming storms, or a shamanic transformation, reflecting the spiritual journey of rulers or priests, or a symbol of powerful hybrid energy where human intelligence meets feline ferocity. The Olmecs likely saw the jaguar as sacred, not just for its strength, but for its ability to live between worlds, on land, in water, and in the dark. Mystical realm of the jungle. It's essentially the divine version of multitasking, Olmec style. But jaguars weren't the only spiritual heavyweights. Serpents, particularly the feathered serpent, also slither into Olmec iconography and later appear prominently in Maya and Aztec traditions. Some researchers argue that early Olmec depictions of serpents hint at sky gods or creator deities, figures that bring rain, wind, and perhaps even cosmic order, while the feathered serpent is more clearly associated with later cultures, Quetzalcoatl for the Aztecs or Kukulkan for the Maya. Some believe the roots of this concept go all the way back to the Olmec carvings. So here's the scholarly dilemma. We're not even sure if the Olmecs had a pantheon in the way the Greeks or Romans did. It's possible their deities were spiritual forces, not anthropomorphic gods, symbolic hybrids blending human and animal traits, or visual metaphors tied to shamanic rituals, transformation, and elite power. It's like trying to reconstruct a religion by looking at emojis carved in stone and realizing that they may have been ceremonial TikToks from 3,000 years ago. So, what do we take from this? What's clear is that religious imagery was everywhere, on altars, in caves, on jade ornaments, and in public monuments. The Olmecs weren't just decorating. They were expressing belief, marking sacred space, and possibly encoding ritual knowledge. And while we may not know exactly who the Olmec gods were, we know this: they mattered. They guided how people built cities, chose leaders, and interpreted storms. And they were expressed not through words, but through a symbolic stonework that still speaks, if not always clearly. Next, we'll explore how the Olmecs shaped their sacred world, not just through gods, but through geography. Because in Olmec culture, the land wasn't just home, it was divine. Coming up, volcanoes, caves, pyramids, and the spiritual architecture of the Olmec world. When we think of religion, we often picture temples, scriptures, or sacred rituals. But for the Olmecs, the land itself was sacred. Mountains, rivers, caves, these weren't just natural features, they were alive, infused with spiritual significance and carefully woven into the geometry of cities, monuments, and myth. Because in Mesoamerican belief systems, the gods didn't just descend from the heavens, they erupted from the volcano and flowed through the valley. Olmec centers like San Lorenzo and La Venta were built with clear orientation towards sacred features in the landscape. Many scholars argue that the placement of these sites align with nearby volcanoes, possibly seen as points of emergence or divine energy, cave systems symbolic of the underworld or the entrance to spiritual realms, rivers which mirrored the flow of life and connected ceremonial centers to the movement of trade, tribute, and meaning. It's the ancient architectural equivalent of location, cosmic symbolism. In Mesoamerican cosmology, the world was often envisioned in three levels: the heavens above, the earthly plane, and the watery or shadowy underworld below. Mountains were more than mountains. They were axis mundi, or world centers, connecting all three realms. And building a pyramid or platform in alignment with these natural forms wasn't just practical, it was participating in the divine order. Olmec sites weren't haphazardly laid out. Cities like La Venta were designed with sacred symmetry, often centered around mounds or pyramids that mimic mountains or volcanoes, plazas representing the surface of the earth, altars positioned to mark ritual space, and processional pathways aligned with celestial events or cardinal directions. These weren't just civic centers, they were cosmic maps. And the central axis running through them may have symbolized the path between worlds, a vertical and horizontal sacred grid connecting people to gods, rulers to ancestors, and the living to the unseen. In short, your town square was also a portal, and yes, that's a lot of pressure for city planners. Serpents, especially water or earth serpents, were likely symbolic of rivers, fertility, and transition. Some researchers believe Olmec monuments and carvings incorporating serpentine forms to suggest the movement of energy through space, the path of life, or the process of rebirth. Serpent iconography often appears alongside underground springs or ritual basins, reinforcing the idea that life and power emerged from beneath the surface, from within the body of the earth. So what did sacred space mean to the Olmecs? In a word, everything. The Olmecs didn't build cities and then assign them meaning. They built meaning first and then turned it into stone. Their landscapes weren't just backdrops to religions. They were participants in it. Their tempos echoed mountains. Their plazas mirrored the earth. And their cities were less about function and more about cosmic alignment, a physical expression of belief written into the land. Up next, we turn from temples and geography to something much more kinetic, the ballgame, part sport, part ritual, and part spiritual high-stakes drama with a bouncing rubber core. Coming up, sacrifice, symbolism, and why a game wasn't just a game in the Olmec world. In today's world, sports are entertainment. For the Olmecs, they were something more, sacred choreography, played out between life and death. And at the heart of this tradition was the Mesoamerican ballgame, a game older than the Maya, older than the Aztecs, and believed by many scholars to have begun with the Olmecs sometime around 1400 BC. The Olmec version of the game wasn't exactly basketball, soccer, or racquetball, but it had elements of all three, with one major twist. You couldn't use your hands or feet. You heard that right. Players used their hips, thighs, chest, and elbows to move a heavy rubber ball, sometimes weighing up to 9 pounds, across a defined court. Courts were long, narrow alleys, often flanked by sloping stone walls, designed to keep the ball in constant motion. They were also conveniently shaped like the letter I, which you could say stands for intensity, injury, or possibly inevitable sacrifice. You know, just your average intramural competition. The ballgame was never just sport. It was tied to mythology, such as the Maya story of the hero twins who play in the underworld, cosmic dualism, the battle between day and night, life and death, order and chaos, and also sacrifice and renewal, where losing might literally mean dying, and winning might not guarantee survival either. For the Olmecs, the game symbolized a recreation of the cosmos. The ball itself may have represented the sun, moon, or even the movement of the stars. The court, a stage between worlds, sometimes linked to the underworld portals and sacrificial altars. In other words, it was less ESPN and more Book of Genesis meets obstacle course. We don't have written Olmec accounts of sacrifice, but later Mesoamerican cultures who inherited the ballgame provide strong clues. Some scholars believe that human sacrifice, particularly decapitation, was part of certain ceremonial matches. Ball courts were often paired with ritual platforms and offerings, and the imagery found in Olmec carvings, including severed heads and bound captives, suggests this was more than a halftime show. Why sacrifice? Because blood was life, and life had to be given to sustain cosmic balance. Nothing says team spirit like knowing your ritual substitution might be a blade instead of a bench. Ball courts were public, performative, and theologically loaded. Each match was a political statement, a spiritual reenactment, and a communal reminder that power, like the ball, could change direction at any moment. The players weren't just athletes, they were ritual actors, moving through a sacred script written in blood, breath, and a bouncing rubber ball. So, when we talk about the ball game, we're not talking about leisure, we're talking about cosmic maintenance, and a public performance of belief where victory and death sometimes shared the same locker room. Next, we'll follow the legacy of this sacred sport and how the echoes of the Olmecs traveled forward through the Maya, the Aztecs, and into the stones that still hold the memory of the game. The Olmecs may have been the first to bounce a heavy rubber ball across sacred ground, but they weren't the last. Their game, equal parts ritual and competition, left behind more than its ruins. It left a cultural template that the Maya, Aztec, and other Mesoamerican civilizations would adopt, adapt, and reimagine for centuries. Because when your sport doubles as a spiritual performance and a political ceremony, it tends to stick around. The Maya didn't just inherit the ballgame. They wrote it into their origin stories. In the Popol Vuh, or the sacred narrative of the Quiche Maya, the hero twins descend into Xibalbal, the Mayan underworld, to face the lords of death in a ballgame that is both literal and metaphysical. The stakes, their lives, their legacy, the fate of cosmic balance. The twins are tricked, tested, and killed, but ultimately triumph, not just by winning the game, but by transforming themselves into the sun and moon. A fairly intense post-game career path. This myth, while written down long after the Olmec civilization disappeared, suggests that the spiritual weight of the ballgame remained and even grew in later cultures. The court became a kind of cosmic theater where death, rebirth, and divine order played out in public view. By the time we get to the Aztecs, the game had become part of a broader imperial performance. Still sacred, but now woven into the spectacle of state-sponsored religion. For the Aztecs, Alfalti, which was their word for the game, was played to honor the gods, commemorate military victories, and, yes, stage sacrifices. Some ball games celebrated captive kings or warriors who were allowed to play before being ritually killed. This wasn't punishment. It was a privilege, a spiritual offering in which the loser, or sometimes even the winner, was seen as elevated through death. We'll just let that idea sit next to your last PE class experience, and you can appreciate the difference. The spread of the game meant the spread of the court, and there are hundreds of them across Mesoamerica, from the Gulf Coast to the Yucatan to central Mexico. Each one is slightly different, but all share common features. Long, narrow playing alleys, sloped sides for bouncing, ritual spaces nearby, altars, temples, or sacrificial platforms. They weren't just for games, they were communal memory sites, reminders of cosmic duty, religious commitment, and imperial ideology. In short, the ballgame was where theology, athleticism, and national messaging held hands, and sometimes swung obsidian blades. Even after the Spanish conquest, echoes of the game survived in oral traditions, archaeological preservation, and more recently, cultural revivals. Today, Ulama, a descendant of the ancient game, is still played in parts of Mexico. Though no longer tied to blood sacrifice, it still reflects community identity, ritual structure, and the legacy of a tradition older than most empires, because some games don't end when the whistle blows. So what began with the Olmecs as a symbolic ritual became, over time, one of the most enduring cultural practices in the Americas, a sacred sport where myth, movement, and memory collided. Lastly, we'll consider what religion and sport tell us about how the Olmecs and their descendants understood the world around them and the one beneath their feet. The Olmecs didn't leave us libraries. They didn't write books, carve epic poems, or produce long-winded speeches like the Romans. But they did leave something more elemental, a sacred imprint on the land. They carved their beliefs into stone, aligned their cities with mountains, and told their stories through courts, altars, and quiet symmetries. They made religion public, made space sacred, and made games into something far more than play. Because of the Olmecs, the ball didn't bounce for amusement. It moved in rhythm with the gods. We may never know the full names of their deities, or the precise rules of their ball games, or what their priests whispered in caves before a storm. But we know this. Their world was alive. Every volcano was a doorway. Every court, a battlefield between light and shadow. And every ritual, a moment to keep chaos at bay for another season, another harvest, and another dawn. Thanks for joining me in this glimpse into the spiritual and sporting heart of the Olmec world. If you enjoyed this episode, consider sharing it with a friend who loves history, and be sure to subscribe and leave us a review. Next time on Ancient Echoes, we'll widen the lens and explore the origins, achievements, and legacy of the Olmecs themselves, how a people often shrouded in mystery came to shape the civilization that followed. Until then, may your steps be steady, your stories well aligned, and your games slightly less fatal.